thanks Professor Fabbrini for writing these fascinating books and proposals on the state of Europe today. I want to start with what I thought was an extremely important point, and which you also set out here in front of the public right at the start, which is this difference between federal unions and federal states. Between the European Union, which is different states coming together from their own history, forming a union, and federal states which arise by falling apart, and then getting stuck somehow halfway, like Belgium. You link that, I don't think you mentioned it here, but to a very important political point, which is what is the most important conflict or cleavages a system has to deal with. And there you say in the book that in a federal union like the EU, the most important differences, the most important cleavages are between states, interstates. There are also differences between parties, but these are secondary. And I think that is important also to look at the European Union today, where the biggest conflicts, frankly, whether it's in the Euro crisis, and you mentioned all these fault lines between North and South, or between East and West Europe in the refugee crisis, and between the UK and the others on Euro or non-Euro, all these are conflicts between member states, which are deep and which tend to be lived also by the public, by our public opinions, as more important. Maybe people are wrong, but anyway, that's how it's perceived, more important than conflicts between political parties. Now, why do I say this in this debate? Because it has a bearing on how we look also at the future of at least the immediate future of the European Union. It means that there are limits to the full parliamentarization of the EU system. Because what is a parliament? A parliament is a system which can bridge conflicts, cleavages, as you call them, between parties. And that is very good, and we need that, but that cannot bridge the most important differences in Europe as a union of 28 states today, which is between states, which is one reason why the European Council and the Council are there, and also are there to stay and will not wither away, as some people think. And that has nothing to do with institutional meccano or things, but with reasons of history and identity of who Europeans are and what Europe is. For the same reasons, of course, we also have a parliament and a commission and a court which also express something about our collective history, which is the unity of Europe. But I think this double perspective is there. Now, I also had a little, like some of my colleagues on the panel, a little difficulty with the abundant use of the term union, as if there are different constitutions within the European Union. I don't think you can say there are 3 constitutions. It's not so helpful for our understanding. But I almost fully agreed with the way you distinguish these 3 of economic, parliamentary, and intergovernmental, although I would term them differently. How I would describe that is to say that from the start, in a way, the past half a century, there have been various logics, visions at work. It started with a logic which you call that of the economic union, but which I would call the technocratic logic, or the logic of depoliticization. It is to, that was the genius of the founding fathers, is to the maximum extent to get the politics out of the system, because the politics, of course, in 1950, 5 years after the Second World War, was so divisive. And that resulted in the market, basically. That is depoliticizing Europe, and there the Commission is the key player, the Commission in its old role as guardian of the treaties, as it still is today for competition, etc. Now, from the start, there were two schools who wanted to politicize this strange thing of a community. And I agree that the same approaches are politicize this market along a parliamentary line or along the line, what you call the French line of symmetry. And indeed, what we often do in Europe, when we do not agree, we do everything at the same time. So we got a bit of everything, a bit of parliamentary politicization, a bit of politicization, bringing politics into this depoliticized market via summits in successive compromises. Now, maybe if you allow me a comparison, which I just thought of, it's a bit like all of us as a child of our fathers and mothers. We have a bit of DNA of both of them. I have some DNA from my mother, I have some DNA from my father. For the European Union, it's worse in a way it has 3 types of DNA, so I will not develop this metaphor further. But it means that it's not so useful to say that I have 3 DNAs, because I am, or any individual is something new, and the union is also one new thing. But it so happens that at different stages in your life, you need some more of your talents of your mother. At other moments in your life, you need more talents of your father. This is not necessarily linked in the EU to different policy fields, also to some extent it is. But it is in particular linked to different moments. And here I also come to the crisis when the EU has moments in life when the going gets tough. That is a moment when the European Council, as the crisis body, steps in. But there are many, many moments of calm weather, which are almost permanent when it comes to rulemaking for the internal market, which goes on every day in all these numerous working groups, etc., where this paternal DNA does not at all come in, and where the EU does not need it. So I think that would be a more productive perspective. I will not repeat what Jim Close just said on the role of the European Council in the Euro crisis, where indeed it played a role of not only bringing the money, but also of playing, in a way, being the constituent power, if you allow a legal term, of a body capable of not only interpreting and applying the rules of a common framework, but changing that framework together with parliaments and the institutions. And our union, after all, is one still based on the principle of conferral, that is, the institutions can take all the actions as far as the treaties prescribe them and have outlined them. And if collectively we decide and think that the union needs to do more, and often there are very good reasons for that, at first has to be decided somehow by the constituent power. Another small nuance in this context is that on the European Council also, what you do not mention, or not so visibly, because I might have missed it, is that within the European Council there is a very important member of the club who is the President of the Commission and who has been there since 1972. And this means that this distinction of intergovernmental, supranational, already only from that simple fact needs some nuancing. Because the President of the Commission is there for a very good reason, because he is the indispensable trait d'union and between decisions that are taken by leaders collectively and the working of the institutions, or the inner sphere institutions, as you can call them. I also was very impressed and pleased by what you write about the need for a separation of powers. I will not go into that. Maybe we have time to discuss this afterwards, but put very quickly, I think, yes, we can say that the European Union was conceived originally as something completely new, sui generis, as the jargon says. But in a way, over time, and if you zoom out in a 60-year perspective, we are getting closer to Montesquieu than we have ever been. And I think the different parts of the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive power have successively, in a way, emancipated from a kind of undefined bubble where it all started. Of course, first the court became a very clear, identifiable judiciary power. Then the legislative power, under the impulse of the European Parliament, became more distinct also in the words we use for the legal acts we take. And I think the latest emancipation we are seeing, especially in this crisis, is an emancipation more clearly visible of executive power, which you also mentioned, and which is a combination of what the European Council does, what the Commission does, and what some council formations do, like ECOFIN Council, which is or at least the Eurogroup, sorry, which is an executive body, and the Foreign Affairs Council. Now, why is this important? And now I'll conclude with that. Because executive decisions, as are taken in crisis situations, require a different kind of legitimacy of public assent than the normal legislative work, which can be done patiently and prudently, and institutions can spend 2 years or more on designing the best rule and hear all interests of NGOs, various member states, parties, etc. Whereas when decisions have to be taken in a crisis, like now on the refugees, you need swift and still credible and good decisions. And on matters where people care about deeply, like taxpayers' money or like refugees, it's a different kind of politics we are doing collectively than when it's just harmonizing VAT rules or fish quota or things like that. So this old system of permissive consensus, as it's always called, no longer works. Now, one concluding remark on how we can look at this legitimacy. I know it's very common to say, as some of you have also said, we have double legitimacy in the EU. Member states are represented in the Council, the European Council, and citizens in the European Parliament. I think that is too simple, almost simplistic. I would say the matter a bit differently. I would say that citizens, all 500 million citizens, are represented twice in the Union. They are represented with their national passport, in their national capacity, in the Council and the European Council via ministers and their leaders. And they are represented in their European capacity in the European Parliament and in the Commission. And that is the double legitimacy. And if you want if you want the Parliament to be more powerful, in the end, it means strengthening, as you know very well here, building a house of European history, etc. But it means strengthening the European part of people's political identity, of every individual citizen. As long as people feel more Maltese or Irish than European, then all these national identities added up in the Council will politically give a stronger mandate than the European identities. Now, this is something of, again, and that's my main point, not of institutional meccano, but of of culture, of history, which does not mean that it cannot change. It is changing. It has changed over time, and it will no doubt change further, and it should also change, but it cannot be pushed always as fast forward as some people would hope. And of course, the most important push to give people a stronger sense of European identity would no doubt be successful acting of Europe in the field of foreign affairs. That's a whole different topic, but of course that is the one thing where all 500 million European citizens, whether they like Brussels or not, can understand clearly that we are together as a club of countries in a world with China, India, Russia, and all the others. And I think that is where the best bet is to Europeanize national spheres and national identities. These were my points, and I, like the others, I thank Professor Fabbrini for helping us to zoom out on these issues and to put them in the right focus for such a stimulating discussion. Thank you.